Hello, everyone, and welcome back to PTC Industry Talks. As always, my name is Daniel. I'll be your host for this evening. Our guest speaker for tonight is L100 First Officer, former PTC instructor, close personal friend, Michael van der Berg. Mark, welcome to the show, and thanks for taking time to join us this evening.
Thanks, Daniel. It's good to be here.
Mike, you've got a unique job. Flying the Lockheed 100, or what we refer to as the civilian version of the C130 Hercules, is not a job that a lot of people outside of the armed forces and the Air Force could brag about doing. How did this all come to be? Was flying let's call it the C130, something that you set out for yourself initially? Was it always a plan or a dream, or was it a job that you just happened to come across at the right place at the right time? How did this whole thing unfold for you?
It was actually a plan, a dream and a plan. In school, when I was planning towards becoming a pilot, I identified the Hercules as something I'd really like to do, and I actively pursued it. And I've applied for the job more than once. I've actually been to more than one interview for the same job, and eventually I got it.
Fantastic. So you set yourself that goal for the aircraft very early on.
Yeah.
Where did you first come across the C130? Where did this relationship begin for you?
I've always liked the idea of cargo aircraft.
Sure.
And that aircraft obviously stood out as a cargo aircraft. But also not just the aircraft, but the operations that you get to do with the aircraft. That really stood out to me. And being a South African of a company like Safair, I thought, what a great opportunity. So I took it from there.
Now, a lot of pilots, as I said, would have encountered the C-130 flying during their Air Force careers. Was flying in the Air Force never really an option for you, or was it something you considered or pursued and didn't work out for you?
It's something I considered in school, but at that time there was a lot of negativity towards the Air Force, political reasons, and also pilots weren't really flying in the Air Force. So I decided to rather go the civilian route, and seeing that it was an option to do operations like this as a civilian, I thought, yeah, why not do it as a civilian?
So almost kind of like the best of both worlds.
Yeah, definitely. That's how I saw it. Yeah.
Now, Mark, what came first for you? Did you see this airplane and decide that is what I want to do one day? I'm gonna end up flying that C-130 Hercules overhead. I have the path to get there. I know what I want to do now, be a pilot. Or did you decide on wanting to become a pilot first, growing up, and then kind of setting yourself a goal for the C-130 later on?
Number two. So I decided I wanted to become a pilot for a long time, but only towards the latter part of high school, when I decided to be more specific about what direction I wanted to go, did I decide to pursue the Hercules operations.
Okay, so only later on you decided you wanted to pursue the Herc. Now, when did the GMTV become a pilot kind of begin for you, Mark? Was it something you always wanted to do? Did you just wake up one day and decide, hey, I want to be a pilot, or was it something that developed later on in life?
There's not a particular event that I can remember that triggered it. It's sort of just as long as I could remember, there's been an interest for machines in general, and specifically flying machines. I like machines. At some point I thought maybe I should do engineering, aerospace engineering, but piloting sounded better to me. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So you decided you want to do engineering, but flying was more kind of up your alley.
Yeah.
What about engineering made it an attractive option to you versus, say, flying?
The mechanical side of things. I like working with mechanical things, designing, building, tinkering. But I decided flying would probably be more fun, and I've managed to find a path to financially afford it, so I went for flying.
Okay, so tell us about that path, Mark. What was the journey for you to getting that license and eventually ending up on that C130?
So there wasn't enough money to do a full-time commercial pilot license course, but 43 Air School and Progress Flight Academy, they've got cadetship schemes, and I applied for those, and I got a position at Progress Flight Academy in Port Elizabeth. So that and a study loan got me to my commercial license.
So cadetship first.
Yeah, cadetship.
That's not an easy job. Like, I know, I'm sure many people that are watching this will know that being a cadet it's not an easy task. It's a very thankless job. But for those people out there that are able to hack it out and push through, it's a means to an end. And definitely, when being a cadet, one needs to keep their eye on the end goal.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed it. It can be thankless, like you say, sometimes, but I found that I've learned a lot from it. In hindsight, I'd probably do it again if my life worked out the same.
How long were you a cadet for, Mike?
It was about 2.5 years broken. So it was about a year and a bit. Then I did some training, and then another year and a bit, and then some more training.
All right. So it was broken up.
Yeah. After I finished the commercial course, I then did the instructor's course. I got sponsored for that by the flying school, and then I worked as an instructor for just over 3 years and paid off that loan in that time period.
So you mentioned, Mark, that you did it in pieces. You'd work for a bit, study a bit, work for a bit, fly for a bit. How long were you a cadet for overall? What was the process from starting as a cadet, working there, working off your license, and getting to the end?
So from the time I started to the time I left the school, and I left the school pretty much as soon as all the money was paid, was 7 years, which included probably 2.5 years of cadetting, 3.5 years of instruction, and then just being a student for the remainder of the time.
Okay. It's 2.5 years of working and flying. I mean, that's pretty outstanding work, Mark. And some people take 2.5 years dedicating themselves fully to becoming a pilot. To do that, that's not easy, and just shows your work ethic and dedication to the task at hand. Now, you were instructor for, you mentioned, 3 years.
Yeah.
And at what stage did you decide was time to move on and leave instruction and branch out into other opportunities?
Well, after I spent about 3 years paying back a loan and spending that time on light pistons, I decided it's time to move on, and that's when I came to PTC. You got to get the career going.
That's where you first came across me.
Yes.
Yeah, you taught me quite a bit on the 737, and we had a lot of late nights and early mornings making that happen. So I must thank you for that.
Yeah, it was good times.
Mike, so you left instruction only to go back into instruction. What about the PTC experience drew you in and appealed to you to make you want to pursue instruction further?
Well, I think once you're an instructor, you'll probably stay an instructor for the rest of your career. Some people will do it more part-time, some will do it more full-time. So what was appealing about PTC was the fact that it was right there in Port Elizabeth, for one thing. It was a new company. It was forward-thinking. Probably that's one of the biggest aspects. And I thought it was a great opportunity to learn, and a good deal. And at the end of the process, I got a rating, which was worth it.
Was the jump from moving out of light multi-engine piston to into that 737, was it daunting? Did you find it challenging? Or was the training managed in a way that you felt that you could handle the workload as it was coming in?
It does seem daunting in the beginning. The aircrafts are quite a bit faster, so you've got to think quick to stay ahead of the aircraft. But with a well-structured course, it's very manageable. As PTC had a well-structured course. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. There was, besides for the aircraft, there was the whole multi-crew environment. So you had to learn how to be part of a team, how to be a leader, how to be a follower. And when it all comes together in the end, that's very rewarding.
Brilliant. Yeah, you spent 2.5 years giving training as a grade 3 instructor developer as well as on the Boeing simulator, if that's correct.
Yeah.
During the time you left instruction and you were looking at other opportunities, i.e. PTC, did you reach out for the C130 position as well?
Yes, so I've always kept in contact with Safair.
Sure.
And every sort of 12 months or any sort of milestone in terms of experience, I would send him a new letter, a new CV. So yes, I did reach out at that point, but there was no opportunities, and I didn't have experience then.
Okay, so you just stayed in constant contact with these guys, just updating your CV constantly, making sure they're aware of who you are. And a lot of people say, and especially in the times that we're in right now, staying in constant contact, reaching out, and just keeping the gas on the burn is critical to getting that job that you want. And you're obviously testament to that. Yeah,
definitely. Well, I really liked the company. I still do. So I decided to really pursue the company and learn to know some individuals, and like you say, keep in constant contact, and at some point it will be right time, right place.
Awesome. Now, after 2.5 years giving training at a completely different level, where did the big break for this opportunity on the C130 come? When did it actually start happening for you?
It's probably a little bit of right time, right place. I did an update on my CV. I can't remember if it was because of hours or maybe it was just time that has passed. And the HR recruiter pretty much immediately phoned me back and said that he happens to have an opportunity right now. Am I interested? And yeah, it went from there.
All right. What was we've spoken a lot in the past on the show about undergoing that interview process, for an airline specifically, but this is something a little bit different. Can you take us through the interview process? Was there a panel interview? Was there a sim check ride? Was there even a sim available for you? How was it handled?
It was handled pretty much like an airline interview. The process was at the same time they were interviewing other people for the Boeing job as well. So it was a panel. There was one HR person and 2 senior captains. After the panel, there was psychometrics. The psychometrics were different. What I mean is the same psychometric test, but what they're looking for was 2 different models, different to the Boeing versus the Hercules. And after that, there was a sim check, but it was not in a Hercules sim. There's no sim in South Africa, so we just did it on the 400 in Comair.
You did it on the, sorry?
On the 400 at Comair.
Okay, on the 400. Did your experience at PTC help you out during the sim check, right? Imagine, flying the 800 going onto the 400, there's a lot of commonalities. So you probably felt a bit at home in that device.
Yeah, definitely. And also one of the things I did at PTC was interview prep, so specifically sim check prep now. So I had a good idea of how the layout would probably go. And yeah, I was definitely well prepared for it.
And how long between completing this interview process and actually getting the call saying, hi, yes, you've been accepted, you are successful? What was that time period like?
It wasn't long. They were quite rushed to fill the position. I think it was probably a week or two.
All right. And from was it a phone call, an email?
It was a phone call from the HR recruiter saying I was successful and that he will send me an email, the contract by email shortly, and I can please have a look and if I can please respond by the end of the week.
All right. Now, you get the job, you respond, happy days. I'm pretty sure there wasn't a lot of time for celebration because you said they were quite keen to get you onto the line.
Yeah.
What did the training consist of? How many hours did you actually have to do in the simulator, and where did you go for that training?
Yeah, so the training was the first part was ground school technical. It was quite extensive. The aircraft is quite mechanically complicated, and the company culture on that fleet is that the pilots needs to have a real in-depth knowledge of the aircraft's technicals. So quite extensive ground school, maybe a month of ground school, and then we went to a simulator. There's 3 simulators around the world. The one that's most opportune for us is in Belgium. So I went there, probably did about 10 flights. So it took about 2 weeks, maybe a bit more, for the rating. And then we went to Entebbe in Uganda for base training. So all in all, maybe 2 months for the rating. Yeah.
Okay, 2 months, So that's a lot of sim time.
Yeah, so we did that sometime for the rating. For our biggest client, which is the UN, they've also got a minimum hourly requirement. So we did a lot more sim after the rating, just to get my hours up for that contract.
What did the sim training consist of? Now, you've obviously delivered training on the 737. How was the training different from what you had experienced previously, or did it follow pretty much the same kind of platform? Was there any unique training you received to be able to perform your duties as a C130 first officer?
What is probably the most obvious is the flight engineer, a 3-person cockpit. So we've got a flight engineer, and that's not something I've done before. That's something to get used to. Otherwise, it's a typical rating. It follows a typical profile that you'd expect for any other aircraft. I did do some airdrop training in the simulator, dropping pallets of food, well, just the food, the pallet stays in the aircraft. That was unique as well. Yeah, I think that's it.
Any other kind of operationally unique things that you would have to train for?
And not other formal training on the simulator. There's a lot of online training that you might do with a training captain. If you go and do that operation for the first time, you'll go with a training captain. And it wouldn't be so formal, but you get training on tactical approaches and departures and stuff like that.
Okay, we're going to touch on tactical approaches and departures in a bit. So, Mike, you do your 2 months, finish in the sim, time to start flying this aircraft. Was there a base training element that had to be completed, or was that done in the simulator as well?
No, there was base training. So to do a rating only on a simulator, you need to qualify for 0 flight time training. And the South African regs, there's an appendix in the CATs which specifies who qualifies for zero flight time training, and one of the requirements is that you need to have done, don't quote me on the numbers, but I think it's something like a 500 hours or 100 route sectors in aircraft that's more than 10 tons, which I haven't done. So I did not qualify for zero flight time training, so I had to go do base training. Yes.
Where did that base training take place, and how much base training was actually done? Was it a relatively quick exercise, or what was that first flight like for you?
Yeah, so it was done where the aircraft was stationed on contract, which was in Entebbe, Uganda. It was just one flight of circuits and some maneuvers, maybe on a bit of a wider circuit. It was good fun. It was challenging as well because, as it is on the equator with the ITCZ and thunderstorms, on our last approach, it started raining on final approach, and the VIS dropped to the point where all airliners were doing go-arounds and ending up in a holding pattern and waiting for the storm to clear before you can get back in. So yeah, good experience. I'm glad I got to do it.
No, I can believe it. I'm pretty sure there are many people out there that wish they had done it. So you mentioned Entebbe, it's the base of operations. What kind of locations would you typically operate in and out of on contract?
So we do primarily humanitarian operations. The biggest client is the UN. There are other clients as well, but the biggest one is the UN. And the three bases that I see the most is Mogadishu in Somalia, Juba in South Sudan, and then Entebbe in Uganda. But the Entebbe or the Uganda base is just the positioning of the aircraft. The operation itself is in the DRC, so we fly in and out of the DRC. Okay,
so it's in and out of the DRC. In support of UN operations. Let's talk more about the UN operations which you support. C130, obviously a very unique aircraft designed for special kind of missions. What kind of cargo would you typically carry on, say, a normal operation?
Pretty much anything that fits in. So we can do cargo, we can do passengers, we can do cargo and passengers. That's quite unique. So we can do a regiment of troops with all their gear in one flight. There's no other aircraft that can do that. Food, medicine, ammunition, ground equipment, whatever is needed. If it fits, it's not too heavy, we can take it.
So you're operating essentially military operations as a civilian pilot. Literally, you're carrying troops, you're carrying everything to support the UN missions throughout Congo. Pretty sure it comes with its challenges.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say it's not primarily military operations. It's more humanitarian. It's more food and medicine and just normal ground staff. But yes, a big part of it is military-like operations. Yeah, with these challenges.
So operationally, Mike, what would be the typical challenges you would encounter in the environment operating for the United Nations?
That means usually going to cities and airports which aren't so well developed, often gravel strips, places where there isn't necessarily any aircraft control in terms of control towers, controlled airspace, and often when there is controlled airspace, not very well managed. And your average things that you take for granted in South Africa can be difficult. Getting up-to-date, reliable weather, getting fuel, ground power, tugs, things like that can be a real mission.
The kind of things that, as a scheduled operator, someone operating that takes for granted, it's a very serious operational challenge for you.
It can be, yeah. You definitely get your unique flights.
What is the expectation from the crew? I mean, what are you expected to do? Are you expected to do any of it yourself, refuel yourself, or what is the expectation from the crew on contract?
Yeah, so we've got a nice setup. We're a crew of 5 normally, assuming the technicians don't fly with, and we are completely self-sufficient. So we can fly into a dirt strip with 0 ground support. Obviously, we'll fly our fuel with us, and we can do anything. We can manage most technical snags. We carry a lot of spares. We've got an engineer on board. So my typical job is just being a first officer, making sure I've got all the documentation, flight plans, CTAS, weather, paying landing fees and stuff like that. But that's just a part of it. The other part is just being a supporting member. I'll get involved with fueling, I'll get involved with loading, not necessarily the physical side of loading, but helping to watch for clearances or make load sheets or stuff like that.
So you've got the captain, you've got the first officer, you mentioned you've got your primary roles, getting the weather, completing load sheets. You also got a flight engineer and 2 additional load masters.
Correct, yeah.
No,
so,
sure.
Yeah, crew of 5, 2 load masters because there's a lot of loading to be done, obviously.
Yeah, I can believe it.
But everyone helps out with everyone.
Now, a flight engineer used to be quite common on most aircraft. It's not someone you commonly find in the flight deck and the 2020 and beyond. What is the role of the flight engineer in your aircraft? What are his duties, and how do they assist the crew?
Okay, so in an aircraft like that, older aircraft, where there's very limited automation, you're pretty much looking after everything yourself, and there's just too much to do by 2 pilots only, or 1 pilot if you have the incapacitation. So the engineer sits in the middle between us, and he is responsible for the technical side of the aircraft, the overhead panel, the center console. So he manages the engines, the fuel, the pressurization, things like that. So we basically just fly and navigate as pilots.
So you mentioned the flight engineer manages the fuel and the pressurization, things that are obviously commonly handled by modern day flight crew themselves. In fact, most aircraft, the pressurization is handled automatically, and very little or limited interface from the flight crew. Talking about the engines, and I want to expand more about that. Why would the flight engineer be responsible for managing the engines, and to what degree are they involved with that?
Okay, so it's quite a complicated engine. It's quite advanced in terms of turboprop, fixed turbine, but it's still rudimentary. It's got like hydromechanical control on the engine, but it's still very, very manual. So for instance, on a start, if it's going to overturn, nothing's going to stop it except you.
Got it.
There's not much protection. So he's responsible for the engines. For takeoff and landing, the pilot's hands will be on throttles. But for the rest of the flight, it's the engineer's engines and his throttles. So after takeoff, I'll say your throttles, and from there on, he will manage it, and I can command a setting if I'd like a different setting.
Okay, so obviously FADEC and auto throttle have helped relieve the crew. But you mentioned that the aircraft's also pressurized. What levels do you commonly operate? Because naturally, the C-130 is designed to be able to operate with the back open and closed. You also got these massively powered engines designed to carry outsized or human cargo. What kind of levels do you typically operate in that C-130, Mike?
The aircraft is certified for 33,000 feet, but I've never seen that. We are not certified for RVSM because of altimeters. So typically we are below RVSM. A typical altitude is 250.
Okay, so you commonly operate at 250.
Yeah.
If you had to have an event, say, Mark, where you're required to depressurize in your operational environment, what's the lowest you could go down to? What's your typical more in those areas?
Depends where you are. So on my last tour now, we happened to be over at the Rwenzori's, and the cargo compartment pack blew a duct off, so we had to shut it off. So we lost most of our pressurization and we had to descend, but the grid motor there was, I think, 17.6. So we had to stay above 17.6 until we were a bit further away, and then we could go down to 10,000 feet or so.
Challenging. Once again, more of those challenges.
Yes.
Mark, is there something specifically about the C-130 that really kind of has drawn you to that aircraft and makes it such a privilege to fly?
I would say that the 5-person crew, we all live together for about a month at a time, and then we operate together, and we've got this common goal, and everyone's an expert in their field.
Sure.
When they're working together to finish the mission for the day, helping each other out, it's a really nice feeling when it all comes together.
Yeah, it's something special about operating in a crew that stays together, works together. You become like a well-oiled machine and team.
Yeah.
Large operators, you often don't get the luxury of flying with the same crew twice. So it's kind of a unique experience. Let's talk about the area of operations in terms of you obviously contract crew. What's your typical rotation look like?
At Safair, well, right now at this stage, we're doing about 4 to 6 weeks on, and probably about, as first officers, also about 4 to 6 weeks off. Mm-hmm. But that's rare. That's not common to be home as much as you are away. A more common contract timing will be anything from 3 weeks on, 2 weeks off, to 3 months on, 1 month off.
Okay, so it can very wildly suppose depending on the needs of the contract.
Yeah, not at Safair. Safair is always said they try to keep the time away fairly short, so that people can have families, and so they'll want to stay there and work there for a long time. But depending on other companies that you work for, you could be long away. You could be away a long time.
Mike, we're talking about time away from the family. A lot of pilots have struggled with getting in and out of the country at the moment, given the current pandemic. How did COVID affect your life and your daily operation flying the L100?
Yeah, well, luckily it's humanitarian cargo, so that never stopped. We were still operating as normal. Getting in and out was troublesome, like you said. In the peak of lockdown, Safair used one of their Boeings to fly around all the bases and do crew rotations. But yeah, we kept going, which was good.
One of the lucky few, I suppose. If you're a cargo pilot or flying sport of humanitarian missions, you're probably one of the very, very, very few that was actually still operating What a unique time to be flying through that period. Very few people can say that they did that. I want to touch on the overall lifting capability of this machine, and what makes the C130 so unique in terms of its field of operation. What is the total lifting capability of that aircraft?
In terms of use for cargo, you're looking, the aircraft can do 20 tons, but probably more realistic and common number is about 16 tons. And that would give you, depending on the amount of fuel you have, it could give you a takeoff weight of up to maybe 70 tons.
Sorry, you say 70 tons?
Yeah, so it's about the same size as a Boeing, as a 737.
And the amount of thrust output on those engines?
Not thrust, so shaft horsepower, they are 4,500 shaft horsepower each.
4,500 for shaft horsepower side. And in terms of special operations, we mentioned it is pressurized. Your typical is 25,000 feet, but you also have the ability to do a pallet drop while in the air, which is, as a civilian pilot, that's quite a rare ability. Have you ever had to do a pallet drop in support of the operations that you do? And Mike, what's the procedure or the technique for getting those pallets to roll out the back in flight?
Okay, so unfortunately, I never got to do that. By the time I was scheduled to go on that trip, the contract wasn't renewed. So we don't actually have that contract anymore. But I can still describe to you what happens.
Sure.
So typically, you would fly at about 700 foot. The idea being that the bags of food, which is maize and beans and things like that, will, in terms of the way they fall, they would have not that much more forward momentum and haven't developed too much downwards momentum when they hit the ground. So the altitude is picked based on that. You would do a run over the drop zone, see what it looks like, mark it on the GPS. And if you're happy, you'll then do the actual drop run. There are 2 drop runs, 2 sticks as we call them, the left stick and the right stick, each 8 tons. And at the specific time to your safety GPS point, you would then, or just approaching it, the loadmasters would cut the safety straps that holds them secured, and you're approaching with some flap and a low power setting with a level attitude, and then at the time you would retract the flap, apply some power, and the attitude will change to nose up attitude, and you're accelerating, and the load rolls out backwards and out. Yeah.
How much in terms of weight is actually going out the back of that aircraft, Mike?
Yeah, so 8 tons at a time, 2 times 8 tons.
So your aircraft weight is changing by 16 tons quite rapid. Well, I suppose you'd either depend on if you're doing a 1 pass or 2 pass. Your weight is changing quite dramatically. How does that affect the performance and handling characteristics of the aircraft as soon as those pallets are sliding out the back?
Yeah, well, so obviously suddenly it's much lighter. There was a unique experience the other day, not by me, by other crew. They, just before the drop, or during the inspection run, actually, they had an engine failure, or not a failure, but a precautionary shutdown of the engine.
Okay.
And then the decision was, do we fly back on 3 engines, which is quite capable to do, with the load, or do you drop the load on 3 engines and then fly back with a light aircraft? And depending on how you look at it, some people might say this way or that way is more or less risk. They in the end decided to drop the cargo and fly back with a light aircraft.
It's one of those things that you don't really think of or plan for. I mean, what's the likelihood of that occurring? But Mike, why would you typically be required to drop cargo?
It's humanitarian, it's food. So right now, excuse me, back then when we were dropping, it was the contractors of the Red Cross. It was in South Sudan, and the areas where the people needed food was not really accessible, especially in the rainy season. It wasn't really accessible by trucks. So they would create drop zones where various aircraft, it wasn't just us, would drop, and then the people from the surrounding area would come and collect food.
How do they mark out a drop zone, and what's the kind of preparation that would go into, say, a typical operation as a crew? How much briefing and prep goes into planning each sector or each day's flying before you guys go out?
Yeah, so we're not too involved with the actual developing of the drop zone. There are people in the Red Cross or the UN that does that. So if there's a new drop zone, then we'd maybe have a bit of a longer, more thorough pre-flight briefing, where there's a pre-flight briefing every day, but maybe that day would be a bit more thorough. And maybe you'll be a bit more aware when you go and do your inspections of the new place and its boundaries and its threats. Yeah, it can change a lot. It can change from maybe every week, maybe every 2 weeks it would change.
Let's talk tactical approach, Mark, because you mentioned that a bit earlier. I just want to touch on that because we're starting to run out of time. So you mentioned Mogadishu tactical approach. What is a tactical approach, and how does it differ from an approach that you traditionally do, and why would you be required to fly that kind of approach?
So in Mogadishu, there is a group called Al-Shabaab, which is trying to do their things, which is one of them being is they tend to target aircraft. So the big threat there is surface-to-air missiles with something that can actually track an aircraft, lock onto it. So there the procedure would be, although it's very unlikely, there's the possibility that somebody could be standing around the airport hoping to get lucky. So we'd fly at high altitude out into the ocean, above the capabilities of the SAMs, descend down to low level, and then fly back towards land low level, because that particular SAM, which is the threat there, has got a minimum lock-on angle of 7 degrees. So they can't really lock onto you close to the horizon. So you'll come in low level on a tight right base and land.
Mike, you mentioned a SAM. Can you elaborate on that?
Surface-to-air missile.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so definitely someone shooting at you. So surface-to-air missile abbreviated to SAM. You also mentioned flying low as part of the tactical approach. How low would you be expected to fly to complete this approach?
We probably started at about 500 foot above the ocean. And when you start getting closer, maybe passing 5 miles, go down to maybe 300 foot. And you'll probably start to turn onto finals at about 300 foot, so about a mile from the threshold. Rolling winds level maybe 150 foot. You'd be approach stable, obviously, before you start to turn, except for the fact that you're not lined up with the runway.
Okay, and would you say the most challenging part of the approach is just trying to position on final?
Yeah, it's if you're new to the place and you're not quite sure of the winds yet, it might catch you out a little bit. But once you've been in there a few times that time of the year, and you get a feeling for the winds and for the weight of the aircraft, then it's quite predictable.
Brilliant. So, Mike, you living I keep touching on it, but you living can you describe as a once-in-a-lifetime experience flying such a unique aircraft and having reached that goal and that dream. It's something that you mentioned. You said very, very early on for yourself, you had a clear idea and direction as to how you were going or what you wanted to do. You had a clear plan how to get there. You consistently updated your CV whenever there's a milestone. You put it in. You just kept raising the flag and letting everybody know that you were there, that you were available for that job. Given the current environment, we've got Wayne watching. I'm pretty sure you've seen the message. He says, Mike, what flying or aviation advice would you give to young pilots wanting to follow in your footsteps and maybe get to where you are and what you've achieved in your career so far?
I would say that it's not all about what you know. So as you touched on, it's just pick a certain direction, a certain company, a certain type of job you want to do, and then actively pursue it. I got the job well under the requirements set out by the company. So even if you don't have the requirements, show interest. And you're not going to necessarily get the first time. I've been to that interview for that job before as well, which I didn't pass, but eventually, obviously, I did. Yeah, at some point, you'll be in the right place at the right time. Contract work can be good fun if you're with a good company, but it can also be very unpleasant if you're with not such a good company. So if you're thinking about doing contract, try and you've been offered a job, talk to the pilots who are already flying in the company and get a feeling for what the company culture is like, what the rotations are like, the accommodation, the state of the aircraft, the type of operations. And don't just blindly follow the carrot of a big salary. It might not be worth it. So choose carefully where you want to go and take it from there.
So this is the old adage here. You can pick the airplane, you can pick the lifestyle, or you can pick the money. You can get 2 out of 3, but very, very rarely you can get all 3. And like you said, sometimes money's just not necessarily worth it.
Yeah.
Mike, I've got another question from Eddie. He goes, hi, Mike, what is the current job market, especially during this pandemic, and where do you think things are going to pick up?
I think it's already picking up. We were talking the other day, you and me, Daniel, about the amount of flights in the air. About Flight 24 was saying that we're almost back to pre-COVID flights. So things are definitely picking up. People are interviewing. Airlink is interviewing. Comair is interviewing. On WhatsApp groups that I'm on, I see people talking about even some 1 or 2 contract jobs starting. It is picking up. When it will necessarily pick up in the sector that Eddie's looking for, I don't know. But it's definitely improving.
Mike, would you say for the people that are watching that are considering getting into aviation, that might be inspired by your story and what you've achieved, would you say now's a good time to start your training? If
you want to do it, I think the earlier you start, the better. So it's always a good time to start training. Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Mike, I want to say thank you very, very much for joining us on the show tonight. It's certainly been a very interesting and different discussion. Wish you all the best as you leave for contract again, and trust you keep safe that side, and we'll be seeing you around again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.